Before we begin this session, I want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. M.R. Srinivasan and Mrs. Srinivasan. I have a particular bond with both of them. Dr. M.R.S. Srinivasan was my immediate boss in the Department of Atomic Energy in the mid-1980s. We are both still very, very young. And just in case you did not know this background, Mrs. Srinivasan was my tennis partner on the clay courts of the Zerlina building, which belongs to the Department of Atomic Energy. So don't take her on lightly on the tennis court. She's a fierce competitor. Okay, now that I have acknowledged the presence of two people and everybody here, we're delighted that you are here. Post-lunch is a very difficult session. I was told by someone that in some movie, Gregory Peck was a professor at some place or the other, and he was going into a classroom immediately after lunch, and he found that there were very few people, and also most of those who were in the room were kind of half sleepy. So he suddenly, out of the blue, said, "Sex, sex, sex," and suddenly everyone woke up. So I thought I'll try the same tactic here. You know, this country is, I won't say divided, but there is this talk about India and Bharat. I think it's a false dichotomy, and we'll let the other panelists here speak to that or whatever else they want to speak to with regard to their books and so on. About a year back, in the sleepy town of Tejpur in Assam, at a club set up by the British, which had 9 grass courts in something like 1880, tennis grass courts. He asked me a straightforward question, this Frenchman, married to an Assamese lady. He asked me, would India have been one country if the British had not come and colonized the entire country and gradually taken control of the whole country and set up Delhi as its political capital and the administrative structure with district magistrates and an Indian army with various regiments drawn from different communities, different parts of the country? I will give my answer to him, to you, gradually over the course of the afternoon. I've already said that I don't believe that this dichotomy between India and Bharat, which has also got politically charged now, because some people in government would like to call it Bharat, and it is unfortunately true that those of us who are familiar with English are sometimes not that familiar and can read and write well in any vernacular language, even their own mother tongue, because they've grown up in English medium schools and colleges. I'll stop there, and then I'll turn to Debashish to talk about his book and whatever else he wants to talk about with regard to whichever Prime Minister, not just the ones he's written about, but anybody else he wants to talk about. Debashish, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Bhagwati. Yeah, but I think I should stick to my book, which is a subject I know. There are specialists here on other books, on other prime ministers, and especially Dr. Bhagwati, who has written about all of them. And so I'll leave the floor to him on these other subjects. Now, talking about the person I wrote, you know, if you had a poll, now we've had 14 prime ministers. Now, if you ever did a poll on who is the most hated of all our prime ministers, I think the subject of my book would top it. You know, Vishwanath Pratap Singh, though he was prime minister for just 11 months, he seemed to attract an enormous amount of calumny and dislike. Even today, even when I wrote the book, a number of people asked, why on earth did you write about this guy? And they made it very plain that they didn't even care for him. And there's a lot of irony there also, because VP Singh, all his life, anybody you talk to among his associates, and I talked to a large number, they'll tell you that the thing he was most worried about, the thing he cared most about was his image. And I mean, all of us care about what others think about us, but some care much more than others. And VP Singh was definitely one of those who looked for validation. And yet, as it happened, I mean, through most of his career, he was doing that. And yet, as it happened, what he is remembered for, which is the Mandal, implementing the Mandal Commission report, got him just the opposite of what he expected. So there, though I don't think he was unaware of that, but that is part of his evolution to see, and it was a kind of trade-off between doing this and continuing to nurse the kind of image that he had had till then. Now the main thing is now, today I don't even want to go into whether it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do to give reservations to what is called the OBC community at the central level, which was not there before. It did arouse an enormous amount of resentment. He was accused of, promoting caste differences and divisions. Now, once again, history will have to decide whether he did that or they existed and he merely emphasized it to some extent. Now, his legacy, of course, is entirely about, is largely, related to his implementation of Mandal and the impact it has had. Its impact on the bureaucracy is questionable. Dr. Bhagwati may be able to tell us better, but his impact in politics has been enormous in every way, and even today, the recent developments show that it continues to be a very major factor. There have been two recently. One is this, the first time we've had a caste census report from Bihar after 1931, and that is being hotly debated. And there is another, that is a Rohini Commission, that is how I finally submitted this report, which was checking out whether all OBCs were actually benefiting from this step that VP Singh initiated or not. And the results have been very interesting, but again, that's not the subject of our meeting today, so I'll skip over that. So that is the main, so we can debate. I think the main thing that shaped, VP Singh's legacy is primarily this Mandal report and the impact it had on Indian society. And the second is, of course, he was the harbinger, or at least at the central level, of coalition governments. And it was something that after him, it lasted for another quarter century. Before, again, the coming of the BJP under Modi, it changed. So I think these were his main contributions. And in a country like India, which is so diverse, coalitions always, where there are so many competing interests, coalitions are, I think, fundamental. And so I'll leave it to the others to go further on the matter.
Thank you. Thank you, Debashish. My one line on VP Singh, disaster, in terms of having brought caste to the forefront, more reservations. I'm told about a story when Mr. Hegde was the chief minister. I'll try to say it very quickly. A lot of people were clamoring to come and see him, and he had the chief secretary and various secretaries in his room. And then he told his secretaries, let them come. They came in and they wanted some reservation. So they wanted 15% reservation for some group or the other, and he immediately said, yes, 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 we agree. And then they left after having their cup of tea. His chief secretary said, sir, how can we give them 15%? The reservation will go over 100%. So Mr. Hegde smiled and said, yes. So what? So, this whole thing of reservation, there is only so much that you can provide. It's much more important. And I will quickly give my ranking of the prime ministers. I would put Mr. Nehru at the top. There would be no India today without Mr. Nehru at the beginning. I'd give Mr. Narasimha Rao very high marks for the economic reforms that he unleashed and the Look East policy. Vinay will be the next speaker, so I will let him speak to that. And the third prime minister, according to me, who gets high marks is Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He took the bit in his mouth in terms of the nuclear issue and went ahead with the tests in 1998, which even Indira Gandhi, with her huge majority, while Vajpayee had a coalition government, did not choose to say it the way it is by calling the 1974 test as a peaceful nuclear explosion. That, I think, was a mistake, but more of that later. Now, over to you, Vinay.
Thank you. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the first book I wrote, which was on Narasimha Rao, who was Prime Minister from 1991 to 1996. And I remember when I began research, so unlike the others who have life experiences of power, I have none. I'm a mere academic. So I have to do kind of interviews and research. So I remember for the first time traveling to meet Narasimha Rao's son, youngest son, who had all his papers and archives, 45 cartons of them. And as I was driving, I took a cab from the airport, and I said, I asked the cab driver, have you heard of Narasimha Rao? This is Hyderabad, right? Narasimha Rao country. And the cab driver said, yeah, there's a flyover, he's the guy after whom the flyover is named, right? So I said I should write a book so that like Narasimha Rao has an independent identity of the flyover connecting the airport from Hyderabad city, right? Now, it's nice to be, here in Nilgiri Library. Every time I come and I see wood and I see names on the wall, I think of a certain institutional history, right? You had people running it. I saw that C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer's name is also here. Yesterday I went in the afternoon to Lawrence School, again, a long history, right? And the one thing about institutions with long histories is it builds a certain ethos. And then it's very hard to change that ethos. Very, very, very hard. By the time Narasimha Rao became Prime Minister of India in 1991, India had built an ethos, right? It was that the state knew best. That was the core Nehruvian presumption, that Indian society is not capable to take India to 20th century modernity. In this, he shared the same presumptions that Mao and Stalin made about their traditional societies, that because you could not have organic modernization, because the Indian village was caste-ridden, hierarchical, etc., you have to have a powerful state. The joint secretary understands the economy better than the local bania, right? This was the core presumption behind the Nehruvian state. Now, we could, talk about its intentions, all of that, but by 1991, every metric of state performance was near pathetic. Right? Can you blame Nehru? Can you blame Indira Gandhi? We could have that conversation. But yet, in order to bring about this change, it's very, very hard because Narasimha Rao was a product of that system. He was a dyed-in-the-wool congressman. He considered himself a socialist. How do you bring about change? And the core of my book is Narasimha Rao's tricks in pretending to continuity while bringing about change. And I'm going to give you just two anecdotes. The first is on economic liberalization, right? Now, as I pointed out in my book, Narasimha Rao knew nothing about economics. To the extent that he did, he was a socialist, right? But he realized when he became Prime Minister, his cabinet secretary, Naresh Chandra, explained to him the scale of the economic problem. And contrary to the popular impression of Narasimha Rao as a silent thinker, he knew how to be silent in 10 languages, right? That's the joke. He was actually a very effective politician who knew how to act quickly when he wanted to. And remarkably, in May, June, July 1991, a lot of the dramatic economic changes that happened because Narasimha Rao was giving daily decisions, right? Narasimha Rao understood early on that the only way to make economic liberalization succeed in an ethos where liberalization and free markets was seen as soot boot ki sarkar, was to pretend that we had a huge crisis. So Narasimha Rao inflated it, and the solution was technocratic that only an economist with a PhD could do. Manmohan Singh's role, and without diminishing the role one bit, was to convert what was a deeply political choice into a technocratic argument. And every time the Congress Working Committee, the biggest opponent of Narasimha Rao, would shout saying, "You're selling Nehru's dream down the river," Narasimha Rao is saying, "What are you looking at me for? That's the medicine the doctor ordered," right? Again and again this happened. Narasimha Rao deliberately chose the single biggest economic liberalization reform India had, which is the dismantling of the license quota permit Raj for domestic entrepreneurs, right? This is nothing to do with foreigners, for domestic entrepreneurs. By the new industrial policy, he chose to present it before Parliament in the morning of the budget. The budget would be delivered on trade policy by the Finance Minister Manmohan Singh. Narasimha Rao had calculated that all the newspapers would only talk about the budget, right? Whereas the historic change was the industrial policy. Now, logically, the industrial policy should have been presented by the industry minister. Who was the industry minister? Narasimha Rao. But he was very careful that the deputy minister of industry would present it, because he wanted no fingerprints on the murder weapon, right? Now, he did it only for self-preservation, but today when we think about liberalization, we think about Manmohan Singh, not Narasimha Rao. Second, very quick example of Narasimha Rao's ability to pretend to continuity while bringing about radical change is on foreign policy. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was near collapse. When Narasimha Rao took over, the Berlin Wall, had collapsed. Everybody knew that the world was entering into a unipolar world. But India had bet on the wrong horse, right? So what do? We needed to shift, make a signal towards the United States without really abandoning Russia. So this is the kind of classic situation you need Narasimha Rao for, right? His diplomats, and I interviewed all of them, his foreign secretaries, told him that the route to Washington, D.C. is through Tel Aviv. That if you want to signal to the US that you are on their side, you have to open up formal relations with Israel. Until then, India did not have full diplomatic relations with Israel. We had a council in Bombay, but no full diplomatic relations. What does Narasimha Rao do? So when his ambassadors and his diplomats tell him, you need to reach out to Israel, the first thing Narasimha Rao does is to invite Yasser Arafat as a state guest to Delhi, right? Yasser Arafat heads the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He comes, Narasimha Rao hugs him, right? Instructs his cabinet secretary Naresh Chandra to send photographs of the bear hug of Yasser Arafat and Narasimha Rao to all the newspapers, right? In private, he tells Yasser Arafat, listen, you are talking to the Israelis in what would become the Oslo Accords. Surely it would help you if we had our diplomat in Tel Aviv to actually lobby for you. Yasser Arafat understands exactly what is being asked for him. In a news conference, he says the exchange of diplomatic ambassadors is a sovereign function, and we were not going to tell our brothers India what to do. Next week, in Parliament, Narasimha Rao says, with the full blessings of Yasser Arafat, we announce full diplomatic relations with Israel. That is the story of Narasimha Rao. That is the story of pretending to continuity while bringing about radical change in large and long-running institutions.
Thank you, Vinay. Still working. I would like to, I don't know whether I'm going to pronounce your name correctly, Sugata? Sugata, if you would speak about your book and the Prime Minister, you told us a little about, but maybe a little more in detail about Prime Minister Gowda. Deva Gowda.
Thank you, Dr. Bhagwati. Um, it's already the hierarchy has been set. Who's the best prime minister? Who's the second best? Who's third best? I'm sure Dr. Bhagwati will put Mr. Devegowda at the bottom. So I mean that's okay with me, because that's something that I have tried to do in my book. This is a 600-page book, which is with some 140 interviews based only on parliamentary record and archival material, and people like Fali Nariman, P. Chidambaram, a lot of his colleagues at that time, Shrikant Jana, and then Montek Singh Ahluwalia, all of them collaborating, including the great Sundarlal Bahuguna, who passed away, and Meda Patkar. So I have to say all this because I have to say that my Prime Minister, the subject of my biography, was not less ordinary. But he was made to look like that because he did not dress like any of the Prime Ministers that we've had. He did not eat what they ate. He did not speak his English like they spoke. And he did not have cultural capital, social capital, economic capital, came from down south, and he was the first Shudra Prime Minister of this country. It was caste, class, absolutely no privilege, no pedigree, which made him the Prime Minister. And he still became Prime Minister despite those odds. And today in India, when we are speaking about the depletion of democracy, and we are trying to look at the last mile and see how WhatsApp forwards have corrupted the Indian mind, and celebrating another OBC as a Prime Minister, I think we have to think very deeply about why we did what we did to our Devegowda. The popufication of Rahul Gandhi has become a major issue today. Congress people did not realize what they were doing to other regional satraps. Then they were popufying every one of them. And today they are in the dock because they did not at any point of time understand what they were doing to others. And I myself was extremely prejudiced against Devegowda. I was more a Hegde man till about 2004. In a casual conversation with H.Y. Sharda Prasad, the legendary speechwriter for Mrs. Gandhi, and who was my mentor, he told me casually, he used to slip in things, he just said, you should understand that if Indira Gandhi knew as much constitutional law as Devegowda, who learnt it by litigating, she would have never claimed the emergency. This is there in my book, which has been cross-verified by Mr. Fali Nariman, no other than Mr. Fali Nariman. So I became extremely curious about this man. Who is he? This man. And I did not start writing my biography right then. I waited for Penguin to commission it, and that's the sad part. I did not volunteer to do this thing. And then, after Penguin commissioned the book, and this thing was hanging in my head, what Mr. Sharda Prasad had said, and he had passed away, and it was 10 years later. And then for courtesy's sake, I just called up Mr. Devegowda, and I told him, sir, I've been commissioned a biography on you. If you give me some time, it will be very good. But if you don't give me time, I'll still write the book. So he said a half sentence. He speaks in a very clipped fashion. He said, sir, he calls everybody sir, like in the Tamil culture, everybody sir. He said, sir, I've been abused and misunderstood so much. How much more can you abuse? You go and write what you want. This was his attitude to the biography. And then I go and meet the others, and I start discovering, and I then start going back to him. I go to Kashmir, and I realize that he has visited Kashmir 4 times in a span of 10.5 months that he has been Prime Minister. And Farooq Abdullah, who came to the launch of my book in IIC in Delhi, started weeping the moment he saw Devegowda walk in. Devegowda said, I will come for the launch, but I shall not be on the stage, and no camera shall focus on me. And he came there, and Farooq Abdullah started crying, and he said, it's on video, so anybody who cares to look at it can look at it. He said, until I am alive, until Leh, Kashmir, Jammu is alive, is going to be around, we will always be grateful to you. Because the kind of work that he did there, which gets recorded in the book, of course, the kind of democratic engagement, he revives elections there. He gets money mobilized for Farooq Abdullah to come back and conduct elections in Kashmir. And Lieutenant General Dhillon speaks to me quite a bit about what was the situation like in Kashmir and with what difficulty Deve Gowda conducted elections there without rigging elections. That was no small achievement. It was a monumental achievement. Then I go to Punjab and I am suddenly told in the border areas, I ask, what are you growing? And they say, this is called Dev Gowda. I started wondering what they are saying. I asked them again if I'm hearing it right. They said, yes, it's Dev Gowda, the Prime Minister. And this was 25 years after he had been Prime Minister, and it was the owl variety of paddy. And I asked them why, and then started researching and asking the professors there. And they said, because this man in one budget did more than what 10 prime ministers did to agriculture. Agricultural tools became very, very cheap. And they celebrated that by giving the paddy Deve Gowda's name. Northeast, if there is one other place other than Karnataka where Deve Gowda gets a cutout, it's in Nagaland. And that's because of the Naga ceasefire and how he goes incognito in Zurich to negotiate with the people who were sort of holding India to, Muiva faction of this whole thing. So, there's several stories like that. And one, I'll just stop somewhere here because I can go on and on about the things less discovered about Deve Gowda. And that is when Falin Nariman told me he's one of the world's finest river basin planners. You show him a plan, he'll come back to you in 24 hours and tell you how many cusecs should flow this direction, and where we need an anekat or whatever. And when I asked him, sir, how do you do it? He said, I don't know, yes, God speaks through me. No, there's absolute, intellectually unpretentious, the most unpretentious Prime Minister India has had. He may not be a Nehru, he may not be a Rao, but he is the most unpretentious, underrated, undervalued, not understood because of several societal reasons. I would like to stop there and probably come back.
Thank you. Is it working? Thank you, Sugata. You said enough for me to want to read your book, and I'm sure others would too. I mentioned at the beginning that this Frenchman asked me this question, whether India would be one country if the British had not been here. So, a lot of criticism about Nehru in terms of the economic policies of his time, socialism and so on. Is it?
Mic a little closer, please.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
better. Thank you.
So the usual criticism, and they also talk about the Hindu rate of growth. We all know who said it. 3%, 3.5%. It's important to look at things in a historical perspective on the economic side. I'm trying to bring in a little bit about the economy, and I'll get to Narasimha Rao and the economic reforms during his time. 1900 to 1947, I'd like you to focus on this. The average rate of GDP growth was somewhere between 0.7 to 0.8%. The rate of population growth was well more than double of that number. So every year on a per capita basis for about 50 years of the 20th century till 1947, the average Indian kept getting poorer. Of course, some people lived luxurious lives, including the princes and so on. Between 1947 and 1964, 27th of May, I think he passed away, Nehru, the rate of growth, average rate of growth, was somewhere between 3.5 and 3.6. So while it was a relatively low rate of growth, but coming from 0.8, and I'd like those who are interested to look at the sources of revenue for government. For British India, it was essentially land revenue and some customs duties. For post-independence, for quite some time, and of course, as we all know, there were difficulties with our western neighbor and with the neighbor to the north. My take on Nehru is
that he built institutions and they have lasted and have served us well, whether it is the Election Commission, whether it is the Supreme Court. It is the way in which people were appointed to those positions. Many, many mistakes were made, and I think he made a big mistake of making himself his own foreign minister for all the 17 years that he was prime minister. A prime minister will take the final decision on issues related to foreign policy, but I'll give you an anecdote because Vinay, much younger than me, but much wiser than me, I'm sure, said that audiences don't like dry statistics and numbers. They prefer anecdotes. So let me give you this anecdote. The Australian High Commissioner in Delhi in the 50s, he served for 8 years and then he came back once again while Nehru was Prime Minister. He sent a note to Prime Minister Nehru because he was a frequent dinner guest in Nehru's home, Teen Murthy, which is no longer, unfortunately, a Prime Minister's residence. But he said that, some students, some doctoral students have come from Australia, they'd like to come and call on you. And this was a direct letter to Nehru. And Nehru's staff sent back a response to the Australian High Commissioner saying, but those students have already met him. So later on, when the Australian High Commissioner asked those students, they said, well, we just rang up his office and asked if we could meet him. And the secretary called back and said, the Prime Minister will meet you. So we just walked in and met him. So the point of the story is that Nehru was very conscious about India's position in the world, projection as a democracy, and he was very outgoing and open to meeting anyone in this regard. The downside is the amount of time taken up on all this. I remember a noting on file in Mr. Nehru's own handwriting, telling a senior officer of the Ministry of External Affairs, because he was the minister, please take an overcoat with you. You are going to Moscow. It will be very cold in the month in which you are going to Moscow. So it's a different India. It's a much smaller India. But institutions were being built which have served us well despite many body blows to it, including by his own daughter Indira Gandhi, where we just referred to the emergency and so on. But much more important, people forget that she introduced feudalism in India by first promoting her younger son and then her older son. But even more damaging were her economic policies, as some of us who are old enough will remember. Income tax went up to 94% of your salary. Why would you disclose to the income tax authorities your income if government is going to take 94% of it? Customs duties were raised, industrial policy, which Narasimha Rao very craftily changed, and I am a person who has been very fortunate to have the inside story from Rakesh Mohan, who was drafting those papers on industrial policy. But one has to understand that it is not the Nehruvian time where we had the economic slump. It all began with Indira Gandhi. Shastri had a short tenure, but even more important than the economic was this whole feudal element. I'll stop here because I'll speak to some other issues later and give the three panelists a chance once again. Debashish, if you want to add based on what you have heard, anything else you would like to say about VP Singh, I'm sorry, but I have strong reservations about him, not just with regard to the Mandal Commission and the reservations, but also the fact, as Vinay just told us about the foreign exchange crisis and the balance of payment crisis, and India's sending gold. Incidentally, it didn't go to London, it went to Switzerland. But Mr. VP Singh was like Nero, fiddling away while Rome was burning. In terms of India was burning in terms of a balance of payments crisis. But Mr. VP Singh was busy doing this whole thing of caste arithmetic. But Debashish, if you want
But
to add.
no,
No,
just before that, Debashish, I had a question to add to that, to you and Sugata on economics, right? So just bear with me for a second. Because VP Singh, I'm interested in economic liberalization, to put my biases out there. I broadly think it was good for India. If you don't, fair enough, right? But, one of the first liberalizing budgets we had was in 1985, when Rajiv Gandhi was Prime Minister and VP Singh was Finance Minister, right? And, some of you may, a lot of the, the import controls were reduced, etc., etc. And the great dream budget that, everybody remembers on middle class income tax being cut happened under Deve Gowda, right? And the question I have for both of you, because both your muses, in some sense, represent the rise of the middle castes, the rise of OBCs. I mean, himself, VP Singh was a Thakur, but he sort of, Mandal Commission, and Deve Gowda himself came from a farming community. But the rise of OBCs in India also coincided with a broad acceptance of economic liberalization. And both your muses, both had strong views on OBC assertion, but also felt reasonably strongly that the state should get out of economic production. How did Mandal and market coexist for both your muses?
You want to start? No, that's a very interesting question, Vinay. Thank you very much. So yes, the dream budget that is attributed to Chidambaram. In fact, in my book, I have Chidambaram and Montek discussing that with me, and also Deve Gowda giving his half bit into the whole thing. So there's actually a fight breaks out between Chidambaram and Deve Gowda, because Deve Gowda wants to balance the budget. And one thing before that is Deve Gowda had a choice of Marsoli Maran, because we are in Tamil Nadu. I should tell you this, to pick either Marsoli Maran or somebody else. So everybody thought he'll bring in somebody like Manmohan Singh from outside. So Chidambaram was not in the picture because Chidambaram was controversial. He had resigned as Commerce Minister in P.V. Narasimha Rao's tenure. And he was also seen as not very acceptable to the coalition partners. The left supported Deve Gowda hugely, Jyoti Basu and Surjit, Harkishan Singh Surjit. So, but Deve Gowda, very early when the cabinet was being formed, walks into the coalition room and he says, there's one thing I don't want any objection on. I want Chidambaram as my finance minister. So he makes him the finance minister for the very first time. So that is never acknowledged, or Chidambaram never speaks about it loudly. But it was Deve Gowda's choice to make him finance minister. And the reason he gives Harkishan Singh Surjit, which is there in the Jyoti Basu papers in NMML, if anybody cares to look at it, he says, see, Narasimha Rao has already opened up the economy. Yes, we have a broad social coalition, but I don't think we should jerk the whole process. We should have continuity. The word continuity is used very emphatically by Deve Gowda, and it is recorded. And he brings in Chidambaram as the chief minister, a finance minister, and the other thing that is attributed to Deve Gowda is he's a farmer, prime minister, that, this, everything. But the personal income tax levels, which was just mentioned by Dr. Bhagwati, he is the one who insists, through his principal secretary, Mr. Satish Chandra, that it should be brought down. So India enjoys that whole thing for the first time under Deve Gowda. And in a cabinet system with a junior minister like Chidambaram, I don't think you could have pushed it through if the prime minister does not agree with something like that. So you should know how the cabinet system works. So Deve Gowda was a pragmatic prime minister. He was not dogmatic. He was not ideologically, wound up. And that is something that I found very interesting when I was researching this book. He does, because a lot of foreign policy was spoken about, and Deve Gowda had very little interest in external affairs. But the one thing I can tell you, I was greatly surprised when I had started writing the book. There was a press release which was done, and this was from the president's office, of the Bangladeshi president's office, and it had just announced that 3 people from India had been invited to the centenary celebrations of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. One was, of course, Mr. Modi, who was the prime minister of the country, and he had to be invited. And there was a lot of resistance and backlash to that invitation. Riots broke out in Dhaka when that invitation went out. The second was Mrs. Sonia Gandhi, because the Gandhi family had saved them when they were in a crisis after the assassination of Sheikh, and she had grown up practically in Delhi. And the third very curious name was Deve Gowda. And I was started wondering, why is this man being included 25 years later the three top people being invited from India to this whole thing? And then I realized that Faraka had changed the life of the nation. The politics had changed, the economics had changed because they got water. And Deve Gowda had done that because he did not want to give 4,500 crores or upwards of that to Bihar each time there were floods. So he said, let's allow water to go away.
We have
a
to
little
give
bit.
Debashish a chance to speak about VP Singh also.
Yeah, and one last word. Debashish, VP Singh, Deve Gowda did not get along with VP Singh. He was not with VP Singh. He didn't join Janata Dal when it was formed. He formed his own party and was completely routed.
No, that, to take up Sugata's point first, though that's only of historical interest now, that was more of Deve Gowda's problem with Hegde and Hegde being close to BP Singh. Deve Gowda, in fact, was not part of the Janata Dal when it won in 1989. Yeah, he wasn't. So it's somewhat ironical that he became the Prime Minister in 1996 when they needed a new Prime Minister. Yeah, to take up your point about VP Singh fiddling when Rome burned. Well, I think, I'm not here to defend his prime ministership. I'm looking at the entire picture. And his prime ministership was a bit of a disaster, but mainly because he was hemmed in by the kind of coalition he headed. And he was not in a position to do very much. That was one. And two was there were these repeated crises. Starting with the Rubia Saeed kidnapping crisis. I don't know, it happened within 4 or 5 days of his being swearing in, when the Home Minister's daughter was kidnapped by Kashmiri militants. And that, again, things went wrong. Then many things went wrong. And thereafter, his problems with his own deputy prime minister, Devilal. So, as far as economic policy goes, he says, at least in his interviews, that he had been warning Rajiv Gandhi right from 1985-86 about this excessive spending. And that, in fact, he told him that if you keep spending like this, we won't have, 89-90 will be an election year, and we won't have any money to announce any new schemes. But it was not taken as seriously as he would wanted. Yes, it is true, he was a liberalizer, because by that time they had, both he and Rajiv Gandhi realized that socialist policies were reaching the end of their tether. But there was resistance from the Congress party, so he was the forerunner, of course, of P.V. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh. And we can even say that things were, economic situation was better then. Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao responded to a crisis. We were in really bad shape in our balance of payments, which was not the case in 85 when VP Singh introduced reforms for the first time.
Debashish, we have to speak about the current Prime Minister now. So if you let me speak about him, because I think your books have not spoken about Mr. Narendra Modi. My book has, till the 2019 general election.
No.
Oh, fantastic.
But Sitapati,
another reason to read it.
Vinay has written on Jugalbandi. Yeah.
No, I'm talking about having just the Prime Minister. My apologies if I have said something which is factually incorrect. I'm looking forward to reading your books. But in terms of my own book, and then I'll ask Vinay to speak, and then we'll throw the session open to questions, although we don't have that much time, and then I'll wrap up in the last 2 minutes. But about Mr. Narendra Modi, because my book was published on the 8th of August by Penguin 2019, and I finished it by about May, just when the general election results had come in. One of the ways in which I have tried to assess across prime ministers is by giving them some kind of, not points rating, but some kind of rating on charisma, competence, and character. And I have to thank my wife Rita, who's in the audience here, because while I was thinking of various ways of doing this, it was her idea to do it on this basis. So as far as, we will not get into each prime minister in terms of the 3 C's, as I say in my book. So on charisma, I don't think there can be much debate that Mr. Modi has plenty of charisma, as has been evident in terms of the Lok Sabha election results. In terms of competence, you can find fault with him here and there, but by and large, I think at least in North India, the rate at which roads, I'm referring to highways particularly, not intra-city roads, much has happened, which you would have to concede has been done competently. G20 summit, you might argue that it was overblown, but it was conducted competently. The last C, which is character, which most people have not caught on, I've given him no marks for character. I'm not said it's 0 out of 10. I've not said it's 10 out of 10. Is he characterless? Charitraheen, as they say in Hindi. I'm getting into very dangerous grounds here. But basically, at the end of the chapter on Modi, I don't say anything about his character, because that is a big question mark for me. But I will let Vinay and others speak to it. But actually, I don't think we have more time than Vinay, because I can see we are about 3:20 now. So I want 2 minutes at the end. So Vinay, over to you with that time constraint.
And that really easy question. Very quickly, because I do want to share some of the time with Debashish and Sugata, which is that I think it's impossible to understand Modi without the RSS, right? So, there's a lot of arguments that globally there are right-wing populists, etc., etc. In many ways, Donald Trump wakes up in the morning and he's an instinctive politician. He says, what should I do? Modi is not like that, right? So much of the kind of the worldview that he exemplifies, he's been shaped by the RSS. So on the character question, if you are he is an RSS pracharak, with all the strengths and all the failings of an RSS pracharak, and an RSS pracharak's view of India and India's place in the world. So that is a polarizing question. Do you share, the view of Bharat, or do you share the view of India, right? So to me, the third C of character is fundamentally an ideological question, right? And it fundamentally rests on what you make of the RSS, right? And what can be a more polarizing question to this audience than that? But I want to give a few minutes to them too, please.
No, I mean, this, as regards the character question, I'll not even venture into that territory, because it also depends on your own prejudices as to how you evaluate somebody's character and charisma. So, I mean, the subject of my biography will be in danger territory when it comes to that, so I will not venture into that. But in this book, there is one full chapter on Modi and Devegowda, and it is all about letters, these are from Vajpayee papers, letters that Devegowda wrote to Modi, to Vajpayee, about Modi, sitting in the Muslim camps of Godhra when the riots were happening. He goes on a solo mission, plonks himself there, and writes 8 letters, very harsh letters to Modi, to Vajpayee, speaking to him about Raj Dharma. And you know what happened later, who used the word Raj Dharma. But those letters, I've used some of them, and he also, for the first time, speaks about state-sponsored terrorism. This is Devegowda writing longhand. I should say he wrote longhand because all his notes, even if you go look up parliamentary papers, it's all longhand. And I want to emphasize that, I've also used some sheets in the book, because Sunil Kilani's great book, Idea of India, begins with a wrong fact, saying that Devegowda did not know English. He does not even know Devegowda had English education in Hole Narsipur. and wrote perfectly all right English, but he did not speak the English of the Lutyens Delhi. And my book was inspired when the backlash started globally against the idea of meritocracy and all that. And I don't think Debashish has to be apologetic, because 99% of India benefited from what Mandal, today the Congress has come around. The Congress is speaking about caste. Look at what Rahul Gandhi is saying. I think your subject of your biography is vindicated.
Yeah, he is. Caste remains important and will continue to be important I mean, it depends on the kind of audience one is talking with. To a large section, it is still very important. They know the reality. But as for Modi, I think Vinay was absolutely right in noting that he is primarily a pracharak, though he himself has marginalized the RSS in several ways. That is realpolitik. But he very much shares the view which is quite contrary, or which is sharply at odds with the view, the Gandhi, Nehru idea of India, their idea of Indian history. And that has been, debated endlessly, and it will continue as long as Modi and the BJP remain a pertinent factor. So character I would not go into, but it is a different understanding of life, of everything under the sun. But Modi's, as far as being open to things like technology, he has, I think, been very much so. He has adapted to the times, given the background and the generation he comes from. And now let us see which idea of India triumphs ultimately, or whether this tussle continues for another century.
One line, and then we throw it open to the audience for questions. I hope that there is no such tussle between India and Bharat. We've had many such tussles in the last 1,000 years, and we have invariably suffered as a result. It is a great effort by the people who fought for independence to bring India together. Let us not do anything by creating confusion amongst ourselves. Of course, social upliftment, education for the masses, health, public health particularly, efforts for that are needed. But I'll stop there, and each of you can make up your own minds after reading their books as to which other books you might like to read to supplement your understanding of what this country has been all about and where it is headed. So now, I don't know who will hand out the mics.
Primarily is aimed at Sugata Srinivasaraju. You just spoke about Deve Gowda and his very secular leanings and the letters he wrote to Vajpayee. And then could you now throw some light on this decision of the Janata Dal secular to join with the BJP? Is it just to save the gaddis for his sons? Or is it that in politics make strange bedfellows? Thank you.
Thank you. So it's not that I didn't anticipate. My biography stops at 2000. So you should, it stops at 2000 because I wanted to keep a 25-year break because it's too close contemporary history and you will be making mistakes. So I promised to write a chapter after he's gone. And that's the contract as well with Penguin, that I add a chapter the last 25 years, but you will get a glimpse of all that in my epilogue. There are problematic areas, but then there are areas which you will be surprised that he's a very lonely man.
So, question to all of you. What is the fatal flaw you would identify in each of your prime ministers? And what is the fatal outcome from that fatal flaw in their characters?
So, for each of us.
No, I don't think he had any fatal flaw. In fact, he overcame that flaw of being overconscious about his image. But what his legacy is, people will have to debate and decide.
You, then you.
Narasimha Rao's two fatal flaws are also defining moments in Indian history, which is Sikh riots In 1984, he was the Home Minister, and in the book, I call it his vilest hour, right? He was Home Minister. He was given an order by the Prime Minister's office to do nothing. But all of you know that the Delhi police reports to the Union Home Minister. It happened on his watch, and I would say that it is the worst moment of his life, professional moment. People say Babri Masjid, and at least in the book, I'm more sympathetic to him on Babri Masjid, that he was really hemmed in. And he was worried that whether the mosque falls on December 6th or not, the Congress would make Narasimha Rao fall. That was his big worry. And I think at a moment in which we needed a statesman, he behaved like a politician. But that's not the worst thing you can say about him.
Well, Devegowda has been in politics for 70 years. That is including his student politics. He has enjoyed power only for 6 years. So his fatal flaw may be having survived politics for 70 years itself. Because he doesn't look like he's going to retire anytime. Because last week he gave such a brilliant interview to the Indian Express Delhi, and where he decimated a lot of things that were being thrown at him. So that is one thing. But the other thing that I personally felt when I was doing the book is extremely withdrawn and melancholic. Melancholia is something that I identify in him. And that there's a reason, I won't tell you why, but you can look up the book. He's a very melancholic person. And perhaps if he had opened up to life differently, perhaps he would have done things differently.
Two fatal flaws in two prime ministers who ruled or were prime minister for the longest years. Nehru, fatal flaw. He wrote an article which appeared in a newspaper, I forget which was titled, After Nehru Who? He did not build up a second, third layers of leadership within the Congress party, despite being conscious about the fact that no such leadership was emerging. The fatal flaw for Indira Gandhi, Putramo, you might remember from Mahabharata, Dhritarashtra, and his love for Duryodhan, and that is what destroyed the Kurus. And Indira Gandhi has not destroyed India because we are, after all, indestructible. But she did put us on a perilous path with this Putramo. Any other questions, please?
I want to say one thing. That is, only after VP Singh, his Mandal Commission and all, the voice of OBC is heard. And that people not dejected in one thing. They got admissions in premier institutions like IITs, IMM, management institutes, and on behalf of all those OBC people, as I am indebted to him.
Yeah, very
That's
true.
the legacy.
Very true, yes.
Yes.
Yes, very much.
Yes.
Absolutely
Because
correct.
more than 60% of the people of India belong to that OBC category.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
That from 1947, the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes did get reservation according to their percentage in the population. The OBC at the central level and in many states, not in all states, because in the South they did have some reservation, but they had absolutely no affirmative action taken on their behalf. So BP Singh's step did, SCs were the former untouchables. STs are the tribals, but it's just that does not mean that any other section of Indian society was not, oppressed or not having historical disadvantages. And this large section, which was between the untouchables and the people, the elite, got their first chance to at least compete better under VP Singh. So that's why he did help a lot of people, yes.
So many prime ministers were spoken about. How about Dr. Manmohan Singh? What would be your views on him or his legacy that he has left behind?
Who wants to take that? I will read out what I have at the beginning of the chapter on Manmohan Singh. It is a quote. Just a minute, I have to find the chapter on Manmohan Singh. He's just before Mr. Modi. No, you'll enjoy it. It's funny and also very, Narendra Modi's chapter is very long. So I have to flip through many. No, I'm almost there. Yeah. So the chapter on Manmohan Singh, the strap line, as they say in newspapers, long-lasting achievements, yet Prime Minister in name. Okay, this quote is from the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, of course. So this is what I say about Manmohan Singh, which more or less sums up the chapter. No, I'm not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. Am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, to start a scene or two, advise the prince. No doubt, an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use, politic, cautious, meticulous, full of high sentence, but a bit obtuse. At times, indeed, almost ridiculous, almost at times the fool. So that is by T.S. Eliot, and I don't know, but that is my sense. Describes Dr. Manmohan Singh very well. If anybody wants to have a last word, please do so.
Well, just to give you a very quick counter, I'm not fully sure that this image of Manmohan Singh as a chamcha to Sonia Gandhi quite covers the UPA years. From what little inside stories I have, I think the main issue was that you were running an ungovernable coalition where the Congress had 145 seats and then 200 plus seats. The Congress party, unlike the BJP, everybody does their own thing, So to discipline Arjun Singh, Pranab Mukherjee, so they are your biggest enemies, right? If Sonia Gandhi had been Prime Minister, you could have said, the same Alfred J. Prufrock story about her. I think definitely Manmohan Singh was hemmed in, but I suspect, I'm not saying it definitely, that he was less of an attendant, but prisoner to the highly limited power the Congress enjoyed in those 10 years. And seen that way that he was even able to stretch it slightly goes to his credit.
One last line. I personally admire Dr. Singh, but I have argued in this book as well as my next book on Rahul Gandhi, which is there, it's called Strange Burdens. See, you have Modi because you had Manmohan Singh. India is such a vast country, a diverse country. You needed a political prime minister, not a technocrat. So a lot of things were left unattended. And as a result, it was all very nice to have technocrats, PhDs from Harvard and MIT running your government or advisors. But then, the person who spoke in the last row and spoke about VP Singh, that is Bharat, that is India, and you have to be rootedly cosmopolitan to run this country. And that's my...
I have to have the last word as the moderator.
Oh, yes.
The last word on Manmohan Singh is, since independence till now, there's only one Prime Minister who has been Prime Minister as a Rajya Sabha member. I think the Constitution needs to be amended to make it clear that only if you can win a Lok Sabha election should you aspire to be a Prime Minister. I think with that, thank you so much for coming. The hall is absolutely full. I have to thank Dr. M.R. Srinivasan once again. As I mentioned at the start, he was my boss. Mrs. Srinivasan was my tennis partner. Don't ever take her on. And I walked up to the library and saw her name as to how she has, I think, restored this library to the condition it is in now. And I have to thank the three panelists. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from you, and I'm sure others learned a lot from you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.